Hello, and welcome to episode 13 of Expertise is Overrated, the podcast that takes the time to answer the questions you didn't know you didn't want the answers to. I'm Sean.
And I'm Vib, and neither of us has any clue what we're talking about. Before we get to the episode, let's award the much vaunted Expertise is Overrated Tinfoil Award.
Now, as a reminder, this is an award that we give out at the start of each episode to the person who had the most ridiculous point in last week's episode.
And this one was a doozy, because it was a hot take. It was a hot take of me trying to convince you and the world that Lara Wraith the vampire is a good person. Yet somehow you managed to come through and win the tinfoil.
Yeah, it's not ideal, really, but we sort of pointed out to ourselves that the person who said a few episodes ago, no, I'm not saying Grindelwald had a point, but then in last episode saying I try to model my life and everything I do on the actions of Michael Carpenter.
Yes.
Yes.
Michael Carpenter and Gellert Grindelwald, I'm sure, would be on the same page.
They'd get on really well together, wouldn't they?
No,
the greater good versus all lives matter.
Yeah. So well done for somehow managing to snatch tinfoil away from all the ridiculous things I said last week.
And they were many.
They were many. They were many indeed.
But let's not dwell on that. We've got a couple of pieces of feedback that are probably worth spending a couple of minutes on before we jump into the meat of the episode.
Absolutely. Feedback's always great. Let's hear it.
So, I don't know if you've had this. I've had a couple of people message me to say on our ranking of the Star Wars episodes that they haven't actually managed to finish the episode because my list was so egregious.
Yeah, the most notable one was the guy who said, I got to 6 minutes, 51 seconds and had to stop.
I think there was a suggestion that he might have stopped listening entirely. So if that's you, thanks for sticking with us. But I feel this is a plea to everyone. Go and listen to the remaining 54 minutes of that episode because it's essentially just Vib yelling at me non-stop. And
quite. And like the funny thing is, this wasn't Sean being like, funny, I'm going to troll people with, my crazy list. He actually believes this, and so I actually get angry, and it's hilarious. I wish I could say I've changed his mind, but some people are just set in their ways.
What I will say, and obviously that's not what this episode is about, is I was making a point by having a certain episode as the top of my list. If I was being completely serious, it's probably second on my list. But yes, no, I do genuinely believe that it's that good.
I mean, it's bad when people take offense, are offended by your choice of top one, and my top two was absolutely fine.
Yeah, that's what I don't understand. No one has come to me and said, what has Vib been smoking? Those two films aren't even Star Wars films. So yeah,
I know, it's great. that's how bad your choice is. But be encouraged. I do tell him off, and you should just listen to the episode because it's a really fun episode.
It is really, really fun, and it's worth listening to. And who knows, I might change your mind. I won't change your mind.
I mean, you won't change anyone's mind, but that's fine.
Just very quickly, also on our episode about the Harry Potter Wizarding World, why they hide. There was a good discussion on the Harry Potter subreddit. Go check them out. They've got some great. It's mostly meme heavy, that subreddit, but the memes are strong.
They are strong memes, yeah, very strong memes.
But no, I had a good conversation with a user. I'm going to butcher this name, and I apologise. Anton Brackage, who pointed out, I think not unfairly, that ultimately the Wizarding World is just sort of doomed. They're stumbling towards a whole number of impending apocalypses, including but not limited to the failure of the International Statute of Secrecy. And when any one of these hits, they'll spill out into the non-magical world as well, with almost certainly lethal consequences. The example that he gave was, what do you do if Dementors start breeding at any sort of rate because we've got no evidence that Dementors can be killed from the text. And so we're going to end up in a position where they just sort of turn into a grey goo and take over the world.
Yeah, no,
it's quite scary.
It is quite scary. It's a fair concern. I think there's something there on how wizards are not in fact hiding, but sort of represent the last defense against the apocalypse for Muggles and everyone else.
I don't know
we could make this work.
If there was an invisible, soul-sucking menace out there, I'd maybe want to know.
Well, maybe there is. Maybe they are out there, and the reason we don't know is because wizards protect us.
Maybe.
Just saying.
Maybe. Seems unlikely.
It does seem unlikely. I feel I would know about
it. just cause. No, so as ever, thanks for the feedback and keep it coming.
Absolutely, keep it coming. Any and all feedback is welcome. Weirdly, this time around, it was us giving you feedback that our content is in fact all right, and you should
just take our word for it.
It's a new take on feedback. Anyway, what are we up to today? What are we talking about?
Well, today, I thought we could have a little bit of a discussion about the Gods of Chaos from the Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40k universes. Now, we touched on these guys earlier in our podcast, way back in episode 3, I think, when we ran through the timeline of the Warhammer Fantasy universe in 15 minutes.
Yes, our fabled 15-minute history lesson, an hour plus, and we didn't get anything done in terms of history.
Yeah, I think we covered ourselves in glory.
I think there'll be a few follow-up parts to that just to get through all the content.
So maybe this is the first of those then, a primer on the Chaos Gods, but particularly with the pending launch of Total War Warhammer 3, which promises to focus quite heavily on the 4 Gods of Chaos and their followers. Indeed, I thought it was worth us, giving our poor listeners who might not have any clue at all what Games Workshop is or Creative Assembly are putting out, just enough knowledge to make a fool of themselves on the internet, which is what we specialize in here at Expertise is Overrated.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're going to be learning this stuff from me, and I'm obviously an expert when it comes to the Chaos Gods, 100% aware of all the lore. So people will be, as you say, fully armed to go out there and have a proper keyboard sparring match.
Absolutely. So let's start then. If you're the expert, you've quite firmly placed yourself in that chair. How many Chaos Gods are there, and what are their names?
Well, the thing is, so you've already made a key mistake, and this is where I can tell that you've not read the source material. You said there are 4 Chaos Gods. Now,
okay.
I think your run-of-the-mill Games Workshop enjoyer would possibly argue that there's 5. But of course, the real experts would tell you that there's only 3.
Right.
Now, why don't you tell me who you think the 4 Chaos Gods are before you boil over with anger?
I'm not sure how you flip this one on me, but okay. Obviously, the 4 Chaos Gods are Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh.
Yes, as I think most people would probably agree with you, but those people just don't pay enough attention.
And then the 5th one, there are rumors throughout the Black Library books and the lore in general of potentially a 5th Chaos God, Malice.
Yes, absolutely.
So who's not a Chaos God? Who are you getting a knock on the door from in about 10 minutes to kick your ass?
See, now, my guess is you want me to say Slaanesh, right?
I am expecting you to say Slaanesh.
And I kind of want you to explain why that is in a minute. But the obvious answer to the person, or the god who is not a god of chaos, in fact, is quite
I know what you're going to say.
It's Nurgle.
Yeah, I knew that. I all of a sudden realised where you were going.
He is a god of life. I mean, not the sort of life that I necessarily want in mine, but life nonetheless, and we should honor that. I think the
Right.
poor guy just
He's
gets
not a god of life. He's a god of entropy.
yeah, which is a fundamental part of life, if not the most fundamental part of life. Just because it's not the life that you like, you can't just.
I mean, I can. Okay.
I
Oh
know
god, I
you
can't believe we're gonna
try.
have to.
That's for sure.
We're gonna have to do this. What is it that you assert sets Nurgle apart from Khorne, Tzeentch, and Slaanesh? Then
Purely
don't
because
say because he's a god of life, because
he's
so
a
is Slaanesh, and so is Tzeentch.
he's a creator,
So is Tzeentch.
No, not in the same way.
Oh, okay. I mean, they're all creators. That's what demons are. They things that they created.
Damn it! You had to undermine me less than 10 minutes in. Really?
No, you've been
Oh, no,
undermining yourself for the last 10 minutes.
No, of course. I only kid around. Nurgle is definitely
Hmm.
definitely up there with the other three.
Sure.
I thought I'd try a little biology trick on you, but
No, I can see what you're saying. He, from a certain way of looking at things, maybe he is a little different. But I think the point is, they're all a little different. Like, you can lump all three of the other ones in the same basket, no matter what lens you're looking at them through.
Yes, and I think that's the thing with all of them, with the possible exception of Khorne, although I might be doing him a disservice. I just feel he's a bit, he's a bit too linear. Like, oh, I'm angry. Yeah, okay, great. The other three do have there's nuances to them, right? And I think the way that they behave kind of manifests differently, perhaps.
So I wonder, you're right, but I wonder if we've already jumped too far into the deep end for some of our
I think you're absolutely right.
listeners who don't know what we're on about.
We should row back. So who are Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh?
Okay, so at their simplest, I think you would say that each of the four embodies a core, probably quite destructive impulse of the human condition. And it is those emotions that give rise to these four beings who live in a reality adjacent to ours, or that of the Warhammer Fantasy or Warhammer 40k universe. To be clear, I don't think I live in a fantasy universe. Just to be clear.
I sometimes think that, based on the stuff you say sometimes.
Quite. But they seek to entrap mortal souls for the furtherance of a power play between the four of them. Right, that's what they call the great game.
Yeah. So now, before you move on into them each individual, you definitely said they live in a parallel universe to the fantasy. That is to say, the Warhammer universe. Because I mean, these four guys, we should be upfront, exist in both Warhammer Fantasy as well as
they do
40k, and they seem, to all intents and purposes, to be the same gods.
With one complicated exception, yes.
Yes, which we will get to. So, are they genuinely present? Would it be somehow possible to interact with these?
Yes.
Gods?
Yes, there are characters in both Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40k who do so.
And is that in a confirmed physical way rather than this is all happening in my head type thing?
I think that
is
might
very hard to actually get to.
I think that might be a Dumbledore-esque, of course this is happening in your head, but why does that mean it's not real? So we know that Malekith, for example, so the ruler of the Dark Elves in the Warhammer Fantasy universe, has travelled to the realm of chaos where these guys live. And like not interacted with them, but like been seen by them and seen them and issued them challenge kind of thing. And we know that Archaon, again from the Warhammer Fantasy units, the sort of chosen one of Chaos, does the same, right? Slaanesh appears to Archaon, for example, and I think the same is true, not Slaanesh, but I think Horus in the Warhammer 40k universe is in the same boat. I think he has interacted directly with them.
Mm.
So they're
do we
more
ever see any... Yeah, sorry, you go.
I was going to say they're more personified than my description might have made apparent. They have emotions beyond the ones that they exemplify, for example.
Yes, yeah, and this is
To a degree.
kind of interesting, right? And of course, we should be upfront about the fact that this is all based on Games Workshop and Black Library lore.
Yes,
which, with all the will in the world, is a hot mess at best.
Yes, and I should also be clear. A lot of my understanding of this is based on, I think, 7th or 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy onwards. So anything that came before that, I'm not entirely up to speed on, and I'm not entirely up to speed on Age of Sigmar, the newest incarnation either. But I think I can do that justice. And then obviously Warhammer 40k is just a hot mess. But I think again I can meander my way through that.
Which is good, because as is tradition on Expertise is Overrated, I know, obviously everything about this.
Clearly,
but
I do have an Age of Sigmar source book, but it's in the other room, and I decided I didn't need it.
Yeah, see, Age of Sigmar to me is one that I don't know a huge amount about, and it's because I'm still making my way through the end times, slowly, and so, maybe not so surely.
To be fair, in the end times, you get some quite good Chaos God stuff.
But I'm really worried
that
I'm worried they're just going to retcon it all, because they're reviving fantasy, and I don't know how they're going to do that.
They're rolling that to pre-end times. It's like 150 years before the end times.
Yeah, exactly, and yeah,
what they're reviving, so it doesn't really matter. Anyway, yeah, that's by the by.
But I guess the key question I had for you is do we ever see them? So obviously, people interact with them. I'm guessing no one's stupid enough to try and fight one directly.
Well, there is actually, and this is quite interesting. So the legendary lord that Creative Assembly announced for the Khorne faction, Skarbrand, is, as far as I'm aware, the only being that's ever tried to take a chunk out of Khorne. And he failed quite badly, obviously.
And this is one of the most badass, exalted bloodthirsters you'll ever meet.
Sure. So Khorne is, for benefit of our listeners, Khorne is the blood god, so the god of war, fury, and blood.
And skulls. Skulls for the skull
throne. Skulls for the skull throne, exactly.
The blood god,
Milk for the cornflakes, as everyone is so fond of saying.
Absolutely.
But so, yes, Khorne is, to the extent that these terms still have any meaning, the single most powerful entity in this or any universe. Right? He is the mightiest of the Chaos Gods. That's confirmed. At least he was in 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy. And I haven't seen anything to suggest that is no longer the case.
One of our favorite words on this podcast, powerful. And
yes,
having power ranking relative to others.
Who knows what that means? But what we do know is Skarbrand, who was at one point the strongest of his servants, tried to essentially unseat him, usurp him, and Khorne sort of didn't notice for a while, and then threw him out a window so hard he burst into flames and lost his wings.
Yeah, I mean, that's... Well, you might argue gravity did most of the hard work there, but yeah.
It's implied that Khorne threw him really, really hard. So hard that he couldn't fly out of the fort. But yes, you're right.
I mean, that is pretty... having seen the images of Skarbrand,
Yes.
That's quite something. I'm just picturing this sort of cartoonish flick of the finger, just to
Yeah, I
poke
think
him
it
out.
is. I think it is that. I think it in what I read, this might have been from the Storm of Chaos book. I think Skarbrand managed to, with the strongest swing of an axe that has ever or will ever be, make a tiny dent in Khorne's armor. So
yeah, but this
you
brings
know,
me on to an interesting point that I've always struggled with when we talk about these guys in particular.
sure,
Because we'll probably meander towards some other types of gods that we might find in the Warhammer Fantasy universes. And I've always pictured them as relatively like for like compared to the peoples that believe in them, right? I feel the Elven pantheon probably looks somewhat elvish, but obviously,
sure. I see what you mean.
but more so.
Sigmar is the obvious example.
Exactly, he's just a really hench dude who's amazing in every way, but he fundamentally still just looks like a guy. Whereas I struggle really hard to picture what a Khorne or a Tzeentch or a Nurgle or Slaanesh would look like.
Okay.
Because, what are they? Are they 7 feet tall? Are they 7,000 feet tall? Do they even have a size that's worth talking about? Or are they just... I don't know. Is it like fighting a planet? It's really hard for me to visualize these guys.
So I think that's a fair question. We need to come on to Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh and deal with their...
no, we don't. See, this is the whole trick of the episode. we will never get there.
Never moving off Khorne.
Tzeentch is technically running the show.
I think the best answer to that is look at their greater demons.
Yeah, I think you're right, probably.
I'm fairly sure that the old army books from Warhammer Fantasy implied, if not outright stated, that the gods look like their greater demons taken to an utterly insane degree.
Yeah, and I think that's always kind of how I've probably concluded that in my head. So if we again go back to Khorne, his great demons, the bloodthirsters, or the exalted bloodthirsters, I suppose. Think Balrogs.
Yes.
Fiery Balrogs, and then Khorne is just that, but times some stupid
It becomes really hard to picture how one of them could possibly think to usurp him. That's where things start to get complicated. So I wonder if their forms are malleable, I suspect. And so
in their realm they can probably do presumably whatever the hell they want,
and that's where the realm of chaos, the warp is a realm of pure sort of emotion, and so they can sort of anyone can appear however they want in that.
And ultimately, like in their domain, you probably are in some ways
inside them.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say as well. Which, as weird as it sounds, it's just a bad idea. But then they're not chaos demons because they're smart. They're chaos demons because
exactly
they've got an axe to grind. So anyway, Khorne, big angry red dude.
Big angry red dude, like a Balrog turned to 10,000.
Yeah, exactly. Although Glorfindel could probably still take him. How about Tzeentch?
So Tzeentch is the changer of the ways. So god of mutation, magic, and ambition. I think is the best way to describe Tzeentch. So Tzeentch is the schemer amongst the pantheon, although to a greater or lesser extent they all scheme a little. But Tzeentch almost schemes because he can't help it.
Yeah.
Like there's definitely lore that implies that Tzeentch is so into scheming that he occasionally schemes against himself because he just can't help it. He backstabs himself because that's so like core to his being.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, Tzeentch is always... I've always found him fascinating Yeah. For reference, we say him in relation to all these people, these
So,
gods. I
so
don't know if they
three
really
of
have
them,
any kind of sex.
three of them are regularly referred to as male. So Khorne, Tzeentch, and
Yeah.
Nurgle are regularly
Slanesh is
referred to
yeah.
as male. Tzeentch, I think, is probably less male than the other two. Khorne obviously is the prime alpha male
Yeah.
embodiment of rage, and Nurgle is consistently referred to as grandfather.
Yeah, or Papa Nurgle, right?
Or Papa Nurgle, exactly.
Yeah.
Slanesh is. We just need to come on to Slanesh. Gender fluid, I think.
Yeah, which I think fits sort of their character and their style quite
Yeah.
well. But no, but Tzeentch I've always liked, because I feel, and I hope you'll agree, that sort of if we think about Khorne, Nurgle, and Slanesh, they are gods who would mess with aspects of the involuntary mind, or sort of the proper emotional mind, the sort of stuff you don't necessarily think about, but that drives you nonetheless. Whereas Tzeentch always struck me as someone who would just go for your more your cerebral cortex, like he targets thought and he targets actual rational thinking, and somehow gets to you that way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Tzeentch is prime for manipulating and catching scholars, wizards, studious people with a studious mind, right? The search for forbidden knowledge. That's
Exactly.
prime Tzeentch.
It's people who almost sort of willingly decide that this is a path they want to follow. As for the other three, it's more sort of just you're a slave to that particular emotion, almost. It's probably not entirely fair, but I've always found him much more elegant than the other three. Shall we say?
Well, I think there's probably something to that. And then if we move over to the 40k universe, I think what's quite telling is if you look, so each of these four gods has a Primarch who falls to them.
Yeah.
Right. And if you look at the Primarch that falls to Tzeentch in particular, that is a fall of hubris, I think, more than anything else. And again, it's, as you say, it's that search for forbidden knowledge that really is the undoing of Magnus the Red.
Yeah.
But again, I think that's linked to the fact that Magnus is regularly painted in a different light from his brothers. Right? He's a bit of a civilization builder, a bit of a warrior, a bit of a mage or psyker, but more than any of that, he's a scholar. More so than really any of the others.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
You contrast with, say, Angron, who falls to Khorne, who ultimately an incredibly tragic figure, but by the time he falls to Khorne is just a rage machine.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the thing with Khorne, is that that's why I'm saying it's linear. They get really angry, and that's quite literally it.
I think Khorne has been simplified. I think in earlier editions he was much more like a god of battles, so didn't scorn artillery or ranged weaponry in the way that he appears to more so now. Right, yes, exulting in the joy of battle and the rage that flows from that, but it wasn't quite the all-encompassing rage that I think you see now.
Yeah, he's definitely much more Ares than he is Athena now, whereas I think you're right. Earlier on, there was a bit more of an overall appreciation of all things fight.
Mm-hmm.
But they gave him a sexy catchphrase, and so now that's what he is.
Absolutely, I think he has been simplified, if not dumbed down.
Indeed.
And just for looks, for Tzeentch, obviously, why would this be obvious?
Of course. What else could you possibly look like?
Imagine a bird man. So I don't know how many of our listeners are familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, but think of something like an Aarakocra, but sort of stretched in every direction, and also having arms as well as wings.
Yeah, it always struck me as a sort of influenced by Egyptian
Yes, I think that's fair.
Something or others. This weird sort of bird man
Yeah,
thing.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, and the stretchy limbs, I think, is
Very
absolutely right.
elongated.
Yeah.
Mm.
So yeah, so Papa Nurgle,
Papa
grandfather
Nurgle,
Nurgle,
the plague father, essentially,
the god of life.
god of life. Well, you see, I don't think you're wrong about that, but it's a god of disease, entropy, and despair. I think is the emotion associated with that. But with Nurgle, I think much more of inevitability than anything else.
Yeah, and I think my very small axe that I was grinding very quietly there was more in terms of, I think people are a bit reductionist, probably a bit like with Khorne. When it comes to Nurgle, they're like, "Oh, yeah, disease, bad, all things terrible." These are fundamentally not necessarily bastardizations until we say they are. The same way that anger isn't a bastardization necessarily, and these are all
No,
real things.
no, I
So
think
I
that's
think
fair.
Nurgle, like with all the others, he just turns it up to 1,000,000, and it just goes way too far. And it
Well,
is
that's the.
he's by far the most disturbing. Let's not kid ourselves.
I don't know. I think Slanesh would have something to say about that. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's
maybe, but
disturbing in a
I
different
still
way.
sort of feel Slanesh would be a much cleaner kind of disturbing than no. Although flashbacks of Fulgrim, I don't know.
Exactly.
But anyway, Nurgle, tell us
So
who Nurgle
no,
is.
well, as I say, he's the sort of the plague father. His big
Mother
shtick.
Winter.
I always thought that was Mother Summer, but that's not this episode. Stop talking about Dresden Files. I don't have much to say about Nurgle really. I've always found him very boring as a chaos god. He always felt a little bit to me like an afterthought from a design perspective. I mean,
Yeah, no, and this is exactly where I'm coming from as well. They just sort of said, "Oh, disease is quite cool, so we'll just have people like burst open and lots of slimy, wriggly, awful things come out,
mm,
and that'll be good enough."
yeah,
Which, I mean, it is because he is vastly popular, weirdly.
and
At
utterly,
least I think
utterly
so.
vile. I
Yeah,
think.
exactly. And so he serves the purpose really well without clearly needing too much of a foundation, I suppose, or not a complicated foundation.
No, no, and for an Nurgle picture, um, like essentially a massive mound of diseased flesh with a big mouth that's also diseased, full of little pox demons that are also themselves diseased. Like his demons are called the Great Unclean Ones, and that sort of tells you everything you need to know. I think about Nurgle.
Yeah, the way I like to think about it in terms of lore that, well, I say people are familiar with, I don't actually know if this is true, but think Trubbish or Garbodor from Pokemon. I don't know if you're
Yeah,
familiar. I think they're Generation 5. Just yeah, piles of
or even like a muck
horribleness.
from Gen 1.
Or I think a muck is almost too clean, weirdly, but yeah, absolutely.
Like a dirty
Like a muck that's just been in the rubbish bin.
muck.
And then just spews, disease at you, which
Yeah,
is just a whole lot of fun. Of course,
yeah.
Nurgle can be famously defeated with a simple vaccine.
True, true.
Poor Papa Nurgle.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I've never been a fan of Nurgle. I don't know what it is. It's just
me neither.
of all the four, he just never has appealed to
Me
me.
neither. That said, I'm massively looking forward to how to his mechanics in the upcoming Warhammer 3.
As am I.
Because it
As
could
am
be
I.
amazing. It could be amazing.
And then finally we have Slanesh.
Which is already strange enough to me, because I before I heard anyone say it, I was assumed it was Slanesh.
It might well be. There's two A's in there. It could be Slanesh, but
Of course, a name shared with Toad Mages, which is interesting in and of itself.
sorry.
The Slan.
Oh,
Close enough.
I
I wonder if
suppose.
there's a
Yeah.
weird link there. that no one's ever spotted, or it's just lazy writing?
I think it's just lazy writing. So Slaanesh is excess, right? That's the emotion that Slaanesh embodies. And oftentimes, particularly in the fandom, this is taken as sexual excess. But it's important to note with Slaanesh that it's not exclusively that. Excessive pride is a Slaaneshi vice. Gluttony, likewise, is a very popular Slaaneshi vice. But there has to be said there's a fair amount of BDSM adjacent going on in the Slaanesh camp, or indeed just smack bang in the middle.
It's just full on hentai. Google Slaanesh at your own risk.
It really is.
It's disturbing.
No judgment. People can do whatever they want in the comfort of their own homes. But yeah, it's a bit. But it comes back to what you were saying about, I guess, Nurgle earlier. Like, there's nothing wrong with enjoying good food, taking pride in one's accomplishments, whatever that might be. What Slaanesh jumps on is when that emotion becomes all-encompassing.
Right, yeah, but that's obviously true of all four of them, because they don't represent anything alien to a person, for example. But it's when you can get that person to purely be driven by by rage, if you fall to Khorne, or by gluttony, as you say, Slaanesh, or whatever. So that is obviously their MO. And I think that with Slaanesh, that's probably why he or she or they has been skewed into the slightly more sexualized realm. Probably because it sells, and Games Workshop wisely said, we'll take it. Because ultimately the others also kind of, they just, they drive excess, right? It's just that they're much more specific.
Yeah.
Again, looking at Khorne, that's an excess of rage, and he just loves that and focuses on that. And Slaanesh is a bit more nuanced, perhaps, or picks up essentially the slack.
Potentially,
he'll just go for anything.
But Slaanesh is weird. In fantasy, Slaanesh is no different from the other three, although constantly referred to as the weakest of the four, which I guess in sort of mortal terms doesn't really mean anything, because if you get trodden beneath the weakest, I don't know where I'm going with this metaphor, Brachiosaurus in history, you're still squished flat. But
that's an interesting point, actually, because let's just move on from that train wreck. Because Slaanesh, of the four, when I'm thinking about the Warhammer universe, like, he or she is at a very influential representative in the world, which I'm not sure you can necessarily say of the other three. I mean, Tzeentch potentially accepted, because who really knows?
What do you mean by that?
I mean, Morathi, very important political figure, quite obviously a slave to Slaanesh.
True.
So Slaanesh has had, quite active cards in the game for, well, most of the history of the world.
No, that's very true. But I guess this a little bit comes on to the Warhammer 40k Slaanesh, who is different.
Weird, yeah.
But it could just be, I think this is a little bit borne out in the lore, that elves are particularly susceptible to Slaanesh.
Possibly, yeah.
If you think, I don't know whether that's a chicken and egg thing. Morathi is there influencing them, so maybe that's driving them towards Slaanesh, or if Morathi is able to drive them that way because they have that easy in. But if we move to 40k for a second, Slaanesh there is different, because Slaanesh is not only the weakest of the Chaos Gods, I think, but crucially the youngest, because Slaanesh, this is very long-winded and confusing, but basically, the previous ascendant empire in the galaxy, the Eldar, who are essentially space elves, became so decadent and wrapped up in their own pleasure and satisfaction that because they were such a psychically active race, they essentially birthed Slaanesh through the excess of their race, which is one, really fucking metal.
Yeah.
But and Slaanesh's birth scream ripped apart the fabric of reality, creating the Eye of Terror.
Of course, yeah.
Because why not?
Yeah, what a great birth story that is to tell the grandchildren.
But if we look at it that way, I think there is an alignment perhaps between Slaanesh and these older style races who are few in number, but sort of wrapped up in their own superiority, which is definitely what we see with elves.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the thing that's always struck me with Warhammer Fantasy when we talk of, and obviously take this with the caveat that I very much focus on elves in particular, and anything else is
You're an elf
secondary.
fanboy. We understand. It's fine.
Yes, exactly. No shame. But in Warhammer Fantasy, I feel anytime chaos, there's chaos invasions and whatnot, and they always manifest in the form of just hordes and hordes of demons.
Yeah.
And the sort of effect of the Chaos Gods and the influences of them on the people it's never that obvious. Certainly not in the way that if you read, for example, the Horus Heresy series in 40k, what we really see, like obviously there's demons and stuff, but what we really see is the effect that the Chaos Gods have on individual Primarchs and their followers. So I feel there's a difference in the way that they influence the universes they're in. To me, anyway. I mean, I could be entirely wrong about this.
No, I see what you're saying. I'm trying to think of counterpoints, but I think it's slightly different because so often in the Black Library books set in the Warhammer Fantasy universe, our point of view is someone who's fighting against chaos.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So we
true.
never get the perspective of the Chaos Lord that Gotrek slays in the Siege of Prague. Right? But he was at one point a man.
Yeah. But what was his shtick? Was he aligned?
I think he was Zinchian.
Yeah. Because I feel this is the sort of...
And
this is the thing that I don't really know in the Warhammer universe is do you have like a pre-Greater Demon baddie who's just, he's like a Nurglite on his way to becoming a demon?
You do in Sigmar's origin story. There's... I'm not going to be able to remember his name. So Sigmar, in I think the first of his 3 novels from the time of Legends, has a lover called Ravenna. And she has a brother who my brain is telling me is called Geryon, and I'm sure that's not right. But anyway,
well, his names ring a faint bell, but they also just sound...
So Ravenna, I'm fairly sure.
Fantasy-ish.
Ravenna, I'm fairly sure is right. Geryon, I'm fairly sure he's not called Geryon because Geryon is the name of Bard's ancestor in The Hobbit. But anyway, so Ravenna's brother catches Sigmar and Ravenna together in flagrante, as it were, and just loses his shit. And Sigmar beats him, but doesn't kill him because Sigmar, yay, is awesome.
Yeah, everyone praise Sigmar.
Everyone praise Sigmar. But this guy then goes on to become a demon prince of Slaanesh. Yes,
All
Slanesh.
right, okay. So there are some stories. So you're probably right. It's just a
And
matter of perspective.
I think it's a matter of perspective. And we also, the other thing we don't have in Warhammer Fantasy that we do have in, as you specifically called out, the Horus Heresy, is these larger than life characters that would be such coups for the Chaos Gods to corrupt, and who are so easily capable of corruption. Right, I think we need to
Yeah,
do an episode on the causes of the Horus Heresy, because I think it's interesting.
yeah. Primarchs are shit. Is the spoiler for
Primarchs
that
are shit is the spoiler for that
one?
one. Should have made them. Should have
Although
made
it's
them
not
women.
their fault, shall we say?
It's also not their fault, but there aren't like 20 characters like that in Warhammer Fantasy where you go, yes, those are the guys that the Chaos Gods should corrupt.
Yeah, you're right. Because I think the main stories in fantasy are, if you look at Elves, for example, you've got Tyrion and Teclis versus Malekith. So that's
The
just sort of
people
an
are
elven
smaller,
battle. Yeah, exactly.
right?
And
Even
when it comes
Tyrion,
to
Teclis,
chaos,
Malekith, they're smaller than Angron or Russ or the Lion or
possibly, yeah,
Conrad.
possibly, because I think if you're going to scale up what is essentially the Warhammer Fantasy universe to billions of planets almost,
Yeah,
you got to up the characters as well. Like there's no other way of doing that.
yeah, I think that's right.
Quite right.
But you are right. Demon Princes in, because that is the end state of a human who falls to chaos, is, well, probably Chaos Spawn, but otherwise Demon Prince. They are rarer, I think, in Warhammer Fantasy.
Yeah,
Than they
and
are
of course,
in 40k.
Yeah, and of course, what we have in fantasy, really, I think it's not unfair to say that if people talk about fantasy and chaos, your mind will probably jump to Archaon.
Yes,
Who is a very interesting character because you mentioned briefly, like he's a sort of the chosen one.
Yeah, Archaon's
and
really
he's a
interesting
focal
for a
point,
number
right?
of reasons.
Yeah,
Yes,
I think
absolutely.
he's the focal point of chaos, and this is why I think we should briefly discuss we mentioned the potential fifth god of chaos earlier, and it's probably time we start talking about this really bizarre concept of chaos undivided.
Yeah, and this is something that you really struggle with, isn't it, as a concept?
Chaos undivided, fundamentally, yes, because I don't get it in the context of the four chaos gods, right? Because if we assume that there are four, by that I mean there's not a fifth.
Or a sixth or a seventh.
Yeah, and what we know about them is obviously they all love chaos, and they probably want to see the end of the world or the universe in one way or another, and everything just goes to the warp or just gets disintegrated, etc. But they're never really spoken about in terms of being particularly unified, right? It's not like Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slanesh would go to the pub to have a few beers. I think.
No, that's true.
And so the concept of chaos undivided, where you sort of marry those four very separate characters with their own agendas together, is just always seemed very strange to me.
No, that makes sense. I think there's two ways of looking at it, and it depends on the character in question.
Yeah, quite.
So, on the one hand, you have Archaon and Horus, right? And they are sort of occupy this chosen one position where no one chaos god is able to seduce them away from the other three. Like, no one chaos god can win Archaon's undivided loyalty, right? But the four of them recognize that they need to have him, and so they all throw their weight behind him, I think.
So but that's key, right? So he does have the blessing, backing, curse of the four gods. He's not just
he
some
does.
other form of chaos.
I think I think so. I think in Age of Sigmar he's slightly different, and I'm now wishing I had gone to my source book. But I think in Age of Sigmar, essentially, he is attempting to ascend and become a fifth Chaos God, and essentially become undivided incarnate, and then overthrow the other four, because his big thing is he hates all forms of deity. Well, that was what was that was what was behind the end times, right? That was an attempt to destroy the world, kill everyone in it, and in so doing, rob the Chaos Gods of the emotions that give them power.
Kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? Looking at you, Big E. Anyway.
Wow. Do you mean the fifth Chaos God?
Well, maybe the only true Chaos God, but Archaon, yes.
Archaon. But the really, really complicating thing, I think, isn't Archaon. It's one of his forebears in the position of Everchosen. Belacor.
Everchosen, that's the word, yeah.
Everchosen, yeah.
Belacor, yes. The one who takes it in terms of names and spellings of names. Any name with an apostrophe in is glorious. You have to say it. Like, it's a glorious name.
I read my fantasy when I was a child. Names have apostrophes in them. Spelling be damned. I wonder what letter. Never. Belacor, yeah. So where Belacor is really confusing is that he appears to be either a demon prince, which implies he's an ascended human, or greater demon, which implies he's not, of Chaos Undivided.
Yeah.
And that's just bizarre.
But now remember, he also exists in 40k, does he not?
I think he does, yeah, but I don't know anything about him in 40k.
I think he's some sort of undivided greater demon, but I mean, don't quote me on that. I mean, don't quote me on anything in the show. You should know that by now.
But I mean, so 40k is almost easier to deal with these things in, because in 40k you have at least one, probably two ascended superhumans through chaos, basically. Right.
Yeah, and of course, as you mentioned in 40k,
specifically through Chaos Undivided.
Yeah, but also, as you said before, the thing about 40k is that Slaanesh didn't exist at one point and then was created. So it implies that you can create new chaos gods almost, and it's a really weird concept.
But I have read somewhere, I don't know if this is true, but I've read that because the warp is timeless, right? So the warp is the realm of chaos for 40k. It's the parallel dimension through which spaceships travel, which is also the home of the Chaos Gods. But the warp is timeless. Right. So the theory goes that the creation of Slaanesh, although that happened in our universe at a specific point in time, because of the timeless nature of the warp, the moment Slaanesh was created, Slaanesh had always existed.
But
because
also,
you can't create something in a timeless place.
But if you follow that logic through, then he's also never existed. So
I know.
That's a really difficult thing to argue. But I think one way of thinking about it for me is that what it almost implies is that there is a power of chaos, or power in the warp. And Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh are just facets of that power that was somehow a given form, be it through the Eldar, as you say, essentially raving a bit too hard on their own Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
And so this character of Slaanesh pops into the universe that other people can relate to. But they're all just derived from a greater power, which could be the power that is Chaos Undivided.
Sure, I think there's certainly something to that.
The problem with that theory is arguably that then you might say Undivided is stronger than at least any one of the four on their own.
I think that's definitely true, but I mean, we know that Khorne is stronger than any of the other four on his own. But the point is, the other three will come together essentially if Khorne is looking too strong. Because the problem becomes if Khorne takes Tzeentch out, then Nurgle and Slaanesh are fucked, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't know. It's all very
Yeah.
strange.
It is all very strange, and Archeon is he's a very, very interesting character, more so than Horus in many ways. I think because his background is one of nothing. He wasn't anything special.
I don't think
Really.
that's quite true.
All right, go on. Why is he special?
So Archeon heard a prophecy when he was a Templar of Sigmar that he was destined to destroy the world.
Yeah, but I mean, how many people in Warhammer Fantasy have had a prophecy? Come on now.
And then go on to actually...
No, but that's
the
the
point
thing.
about Archeon is he then goes on to destroy the world.
But that's why he's really cool, because he isn't necessarily anything special. He hears a prophecy and he goes on a bender that ends the world, quite literally. Whereas Horus is a Primarch, is some sort of amazing, supposedly. I mean, we know they're shit, but he's some sort of special being who then fails to take out the world. Archeon would bitch slap Horus so hard that the end times would probably happen all over again.
So I think potentially, I think what is interesting when you compare the two of them is that Archeon appears to have so much more free will than Horus. By the time you get to the Siege of Terra, right, in the Horus Heresy, Horus appears to be nothing more than a conduit for, as you put it, the raw energy of Chaos Undivided.
Yeah.
We never get that sense with Archeon that he's essentially being manipulated like a puppet. Which I think you definitely do with Horus.
Horus is 100% a slave, as are arguably his fallen brothers, designed to just take out the Emperor of Man.
And you could argue that they succeed at that.
You could, yeah. Probably not enough to warrant massive celebrations, but yeah, they definitely...
No, they lock him in the chair.
Yeah, exactly. They did something. Whereas Archeon just, it's the classic story of, oh god, I think we've created something too big.
Does anyone know how to stop this thing we built?
Yeah, exactly. Khorne's just there in the corner thinking, I'll leave them to you guys,
Just points at Tzeentch, this is your problem.
Exactly, you deal with this. So Archeon's a real badass.
Yeah.
But anyway, we've talked about the four gods of chaos and Undivided, this really quirky concept, which we may expand on in future. I think it still confuses me, and I'm sure we could turn this into some quasi philosophical debate on what I don't really know, but on something.
Sure, we could if we tried hard enough. But there's more to talk about.
There is more to talk about. I think there is a few more names we could throw into the ring of being ostensibly chaos-ish, chaos-adjacent gods.
I think that's definitely true. There's two who immediately spring to mind. Maybe before we go into that, we should say we're both aware of the existence of, is it Malice or Molech, depending on which version you've read. And I think there is an episode coming about Malice and why the Emperor is just Malice.
Whoa! You just came out and said it. Jesus.
But
careful, that sort of heresy.
But we're just going to park that one for now in favour of talking about.
Hear you. Anyway,
come at me, bro.
He can't even walk.
Exactly.
So yeah, we'll park Malice and what was it? Molech?
Molech. Yeah. I'm not sure. It's the same entity.
This is the car crash that is the Black Library sometimes in Games Workshop, where they just come up with different versions because it's multiple different authors and they try to retcon it somehow. We're
both aware of the sort of, if you like, canon 5th Chaos God, who is no longer canon. But we're going to park that in favour of talking about two other people, at least.
Indeed.
So first one here I have is Hashut.
Yes.
Who is a bull god and the god of the Chaos Dwarves. No, I think it's in the name. Right, they're the Chaos Dwarves. They worship Hashut. I reckon he's a Chaos god.
Yeah, but they're dwarves. Ultimately, who the fuck even is it, and why should I care? That sounds like a dwarf kind of problem.
It does sound like a dwarf kind of problem, except they made the Black Orcs, which was probably a bad idea for everyone.
Well, it keeps everyone on their toes, keeps everyone in shape, athletic.
Particularly them. I think the only thing really interesting thing we can say about Hashat is he might be an aspect of Khorne.
You mean
Right,
a half pint version of Khorne?
Yeah, essentially, like a knockoff version of Khorne.
It's probably still gigantic, but
Yeah. But
no,
if we think,
fair. That's pretty fair.
The complicating thing is that he appears to give his priesthood magic of some form, which obviously is anathema to Khorne. But
yeah,
Khorne also makes demons, so he can't get too.
But this is where it's interesting.
The whole thing.
Because the dwarfs, of course, aren't exactly particularly attuned to magic.
Not in the same way as the other races. No, their magic expresses itself through runes.
Exactly. So you might imagine that for a chaos god to get to them, they'll have to think outside the box, which could be what Hashat is ultimately.
Yes.
Not sure what that looks like in practice, but that's just what I'm going with.
We do know that giving dwarves access to magic in the chaos dwarves, at least, is a really bad thing because ultimately they turn to stone.
Yeah, I mean,
they all fall victim to some sort of petrification curse, which is quite funny.
Yeah. So who's the second?
And no, sorry, I've just remembered something. If we go back to the time of Legends and the Sundering, right? Ancient rune lords used to turn to stone. Which implies...
That is interesting.
And we also know that ancient rune lords were far more magically powerful than rune lords, quote-unquote, today.
Yes.
So...
Today. Whenever that is.
In the end times.
Yeah.
Or just pre-end times. So I wonder if there's something to be said for that the Curse of Stone, or whatever it is, isn't a Hashat-specific thing.
It's just a magic thing.
It's just a what happens if you push too much magic through a dwarf body, which the dwarves of today, or the dwarves of the modern Warhammer Fantasy, have sort of evolved to not be able to do. Because all the ones who could got turned to stone, rather than having dwarf babies.
The problem, when I say problem, the weird thing about magic in the Warhammer Fantasy universe is that it seems to be fundamentally intertwined with chaos somehow.
Yes.
To the point where I'm sure you could even argue that it is some form of chaos energy, which then in the end times becomes a complete mess of personas that the
good writing in the end times, isn't it?
It's very strange, but magic is there's a chaos element to it.
Oh no, absolutely, because magic, when using magic, people are tapping into the winds that blow out of the chaos gates.
Yeah, and you got to insulate your mind to that, and perhaps the dwarven solution for that was, if you can't handle it, you just turn to stone. Anyway,
that's Hashat. The other one, who obviously springs to mind, is the Great Horned Rat.
Yeah, I've read up on the Great Horned Rat. I mean, he sounds really cool. All I'll say is that it's a shame he's got no followers, really. I feel the Warhammer universe could use some sort of race that would worship a great horned rat. That seems like an obvious fantasy trope right there. But failing that, I think...
what would that even look like?
What would that even look? I don't really... I mean... I suppose you could envisage rat member. We got in trouble for saying something stupid like that before, didn't we?
Rodents of unusual size?
Yeah.
I don't think they exist.
But I mean, he is a great horned rat. I'm sure that's some metaphor for something, but...
He's meant to be quite pestilent as well. I wonder if he's just an aspect of Nurgle rather than an entity in his own right. Or maybe he was an aspect of Nurgle who got so much love from the fandom for what he could have been the god of if the race had ever existed, that he sort of coalesced into a separate but connected chaos god.
Yeah, if Hashat is like a half Khorne, maybe the Great Horned Rat is some sort of half Nurgle type thing. Yeah, no,
or a
quite
sort of
right.
Nurgle Tzeentchian hybrid.
Yeah, but I mean, that would be cool on the tabletop, right? Some gigantic rat with horns just
Yeah.
going nuts.
Oh well,
Alas,
shame.
no such thing. GW, if you're listening, maybe some food for thought here. We're going to get in so much trouble. um, so no, I think those are two very obvious examples. One that I was going to throw into the mix.
Yeah, I've seen this.
Yeah,
You can say it.
my old buddy Khaine.
Kayla Mensha Khaine. I mean, so on the one hand, he's called the Bloody Handed.
Yeah.
He's a god of murder, and the avatar in 40k looks like a pretty angry thing. And we know that the Eldar already have history with Chaos Gods. See Slanesh. But on the other, I don't know.
This is where we run into a problem, right?
Yeah, it doesn't quite sit right, and I can't quite work out why.
No, we run into a problem because I think when we talk about the sort of the more mortal pantheons,
Mm-hmm.
Khaine just belongs to the elven pantheon, and I'm sure he's got different aspects in other religious circles. But it is I had to really say this. We kind of covered this in our history episode, right? These gods they are real in many ways. Certainly, the old ones are real, and these are interpretations of the old ones, perhaps. And Khaine, if he is indeed real, he is the Bloody Handed. He is an absolute maniac.
He's an avatar of destruction,
But presumably,
responsible for the elven end times.
yeah. But perhaps that's a sort of destruction by design, as opposed to the chaos version of destruction for destruction's sake. If that makes any sense.
It's so weird, though, when you dive into what the mortal gods are, the gods of mortals in the chaos, in the Warhammer universe, because I don't think it's right to say that any war god is Khorne. Sorry. Like, you've got someone like Myrmidia, for example, who's the sort of human goddess of battle. She's essentially Minerva Athena.
Yeah.
But there's never any indication that she is also just an aspect of Khorne. But, like, what is she? Because her followers can pray. There's so much to unpick here. Her followers can pray to her and receive blessings. But so she's obviously real for a given value of real. But if she's real for a given value of real, why hasn't Khorne just gone over and squished her?
But you see, this is where we might have to consider something a little weird.
Uh-oh.
I know. I'm already dreading next week now. If we borrow a concept that we discussed previously, and a concept that I think applies to real life, religions fall in and out of favor.
Yeah.
And with them, you might argue the strength of the gods associated with a particular religion waxes and wanes.
Okay.
So perhaps the reason Khorne is said to be the most powerful of all the chaos gods is because mortals, elves, men, whatever, do believe in gods of war, and perhaps all they're actually believing in is Khorne. They may not associate it with Khorne. They'll call it Myrmidia or Khaine or whatever. But because of that belief, they are effectively strengthening Khorne. Now, I don't know how that would then work in terms of receiving Myrmidia's blessing. Maybe that's Khorne playing some unbelievable big brain long-term game. But I don't know. I think that's an idea that potentially has legs.
Okay, that has legs right up until you come to Sigmar.
Sigmar's just a guy.
Except he's sort of not. Because
he's just a guy. Where it really falls down is the other name that you wrote down, I think.
Nagash.
No, Ranald.
Oh, Ranald. Well, Ranald's by your metric, isn't Ranald just Zinch?
Exactly, yeah. So I don't know if the maths would add up to Khorne being stronger, but I wonder if these are just tamer
Or
interpretations of Chaos Gods.
I see. I think the rationale for Khorne being stronger is simpler. It's just everyone in the Warhammer units is at
Big.
war all the fucking time. And
Yeah,
Khorne
he's just
getting stronger on the hate that burns out of that.
possibly. Right, Sigmar and Nagash. You've mentioned them both now, I think.
So the reason I wrote Sigmar, I'm not quite sure why I wrote Nagash, because Nagash doesn't ascend to some sort of godhead until the end times by eating other gods.
Yeah, he's
basically
just badass, though. Come on, let's be honest.
Yeah, true. But no, the complicating factor with Sigmar, and again, we a little bit have to draw on the end times here, but I've said it before and I'll say it again, the end times is a good idea, badly executed. The problem with Sigmar is he was just a guy, and then he died, as guys are wont to do, and became worshipped as a god, and then started acting like a god, and in the end times is reincarnated into the body of Karl Franz, right? Because he's a god. So we know that some people can become gods.
You see what Sigmar's done there, actually.
Uh-oh.
He's died for his people. And then he just happened to be in the body of someone who picked up a big old hammer, who was worthy. No. And so he became Thor.
No. Karl
Hell
Franz
yeah!
actually became Thor.
Thor is in the fantasy universe. Here we go.
Karl Franz didn't become Sigmar, he became Thor.
Just
it would explain the lightning.
The lightning and the fact he's just got a big old hammer.
Yeah, but Galmaraz doesn't look quite as silly as Mjolnir does.
No, but they couldn't just rip off Norse mythology. Come on now.
No, I suppose not.
So Sigmar's Thor, but no, I get your point. That he's super strong. But this is where it gets all really complicated in a world where magic is just a thing,
Yeah, magic is not a simplifying force.
I mean, you've mentioned Nagash, like he eats gods and therefore becomes stronger. Like that's pretty messed up,
Yeah. He consumes the old gods of Nehekara, and in doing so becomes even more powerful than he was sort of before he did that. And before he did that, he was probably the most powerful sorcerer to have ever lived.
Yeah.
Or one of the top 3.
Yeah, no, it's quite something, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's quite something. Right, then our final 2 names, which confused me, frankly, because I thought they were just one big ugly fuck. I'm going to get into so much more trouble now.
Go on, say it.
No, you should say it.
Gork and or Mork. These are the greenskin gods, aren't they?
Yeah. Are they 2 separate things? They always struck me as just the same thing.
So now we have to draw on, I think, Age of Sigmar lore to say that at one point they were one thing and then they got split into 2 things. At one point, I think they were Gorka Morka.
Yeah, exactly.
It was a single entity, and then I think Sigmar punched them really hard and they became 2 things.
Okay, that's actually brilliant.
I think that's what happened.
That's also such an orc thing. Is like, all right, we can respect that. They took it, They took.
Yeah, they took the punch.
Quite literally split them in 2, but okay, they took the punch. They're just silly. They're just adorably silly, like so much of the orc lore.
Yeah. Yes, they are.
That's sort of what you want from them, isn't it? Really.
And obviously, orcs in 40k are even more fun than orcs in fantasy. Orcs in 40k have a sort of latent psychic energy that means that things happen because they believe they happen. So a human cannot make an orc gun fire, for example, because it's not mechanically sound. It just doesn't work. But to an orc, take a barrel, take some ammunition, take a trigger, tie all that together, you've made a gun. It's
Yeah.
brilliant.
It's
Absolutely
amazing.
brilliant.
It's absolutely amazing. Like that's so creative, and their models really reflect it as well. As you say, it literally just looks like someone's tied a few things
Yeah.
together with some string, and somehow that's like some mega nuke. You know,
Well,
it's absolutely incredible. Gotta rate the orcs.
but the quite scary thing about orcs is, so Titans and I've just seen that this episode's been going on for quite considerably more than an hour, so we do need to wrap up.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
But orcs, well, Titans, right? The god machines of the Adeptus Mechanicus. These 30-meter tall robot things. When an orc mech boy first saw a Titan, he thought it was the Emperor, because of course you would. That's not the best bit. He thought, oh crap, the Umis have brought their god to this fight. Hold on. If I made a big enough body, maybe Gork or Mork would join the fight? Which is hilarious until you remember that if an orc believes something hard enough and there's enough orcs around him, that thing becomes true.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So we're not a million miles away from an orc mech boy in the 40k universe creating a Gargant with enough orcs around him who believe in it that actually manifests one of Gork or Mork.
Yeah, that'll be hilarious when that happens.
Yeah, that's quite concerning.
I mean, the orcs are hilarious, but also, as you say, really scary. I mean, this is why even Primarchs and the Emperor himself get into real trouble when orcs show up, because they're just pains to deal with. They're really tough. Yeah, I mean, and so I think would you and I be, if we just believed hard enough that we're not going to die if Khorne hits us in the face, and it doesn't happen, then great.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think both of us would probably just be wiped, Horus
I've been believing that for years, and I'm still here, so it obviously works.
Well, that's not a challenge to Khorne. I don't know what is.
I'm really calling out some big names in this episode.
And on that bombshell, in what might be our very last episode, because Sean is going to die a horrible death, thanks so much for listening to this episode of Expertise is Overrated. No doubt we've said some things that were either objectively wrong or downright offensive. As ever, feel free to let us know, rate the podcast, and leave us a comment, or drop us an email at expertiseisoverrated@gmail.com, tweet us at zeroexpertise, or check out our website expertiseisoverrated.podbean.com, or come join us on our new Discord server.
If you're lucky, we might just argue with you in one of our upcoming episodes. If you're really lucky, we might call you an idiot. In our next episode, we're very excited to announce that we're hopefully going to be joined by the first ever Expertise is Overrated guest. Side note, we need a better name than that.
We really do, yeah.
But no, we're going to be joined by Ellie, who will be discussing the Ministry of Magic and why it's an insurgency. Join us then for more nonsense.